Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, another individual car review from the 1.41 patch in GT Sport, and obviously, this one is a JDM icon, one of the most highly requested cars to come back in GT Sport, and now of course a lot of that attention is probably going to swing in the direction of the S chassis, aka the Nissan Silvia, because that, along with this and the Toyota A86, tended to be the top three JDM cars that got requested the most. So as far as this Civic goes, it kind of does have a high bar to live up to, of course for the fans, but at the same time it sort of doesn't, because there are certain cars that you don't need to wonder if they're going to be good, you already know that they are. You know, if a new Skyline or a new Evo comes to the game, you don't wonder if it's going to be a good car. Of course it is. It's Gran Turismo that we're talking about, so of course. With a Civic, I would argue that it's similar. The really interesting thing, though, for me about this particular Civic, I would argue more so than the newer ones, like the EP and various others, is that it almost feels like this car doesn't slot into the usual hot hatch bracket of the 90s. Because if you think about it, a lot of hot hatches have very clear, natural peers and rivals. If you think Ford Focus ST, you automatically think Golf R32 or GTI, you think Megane R26, a lot of them have very clear, natural rivals. With the EK Civic, on the other hand, from the late 90s, what would you put it up against? There aren't really many hot hatches that have that same kind of vibe, and that's a good thing, because having a car which is both very good but also very unique is always going to be a good selling point. And for me, that's kind of why I love the Integra as well. There are very few front-wheel drive coupes which are built with the level of care and precision that one is, because let's be honest, most front-wheel drive coupes tend to not age that well. Think of stuff like the Ford Kuga, and I don't mean the SUV these days or the soft roader, I mean the coupe. If you think of stuff like the Vauxhall Calibra in its normal form, they don't tend to age that well. They look very dated, they're not particularly quick anymore really, but the Integra is still a force to be reckoned with because it was so good. Likewise with the Civic. Now, the interesting difference for me between the Integra and the Civic is that the Integra is obviously quick, you expect it to be, but with the Civic, it goes way beyond the raw spec. It's not particularly heavy, which is always a great thing to begin with, and it's something which, just like the Integra, would be very difficult to do these days, even if you wanted to make the Civic this light, with all of the safety tech and the fuel tech and all of that kind of stuff, plus that cars are getting bigger and bigger, it would be nearly impossible to make a Civic weigh as much now as it did in the late 90s, but 1,050 kilos is a great curb weight to be working with, just like the DC2 had to its advantage, and again, like the DC2, they are both working with well under 200 horsepower. But what they can do with that power, and to be honest, regardless of the whole v-tec fanboy thing, because I'll be honest, I couldn't really care less about the v-tec fanboy group. I purely approach it as I would any car, and that is it good or not? Not do I just love it arbitrarily. So regardless of having that v-tec engine, any car that can take 180 horsepower and do what this can do with it will get my respect. So this car definitely does. Now, to put it into perspective what that 180 horsepower can actually do, this event that I'm running is with stock power, and I'm up against N500 cars. Now, I don't win the race, not even close, but if you notice the kind of cars that this thing is overtaking on a track with a lot of straight sections, it kind of shows what it can do. Now again, it's not going to destroy them in a straight line because it's just not that kind of performance, but through corners it feels incredible, and that is kind of a reverse for me compared to the previous game, because in Gran Turismo 6, especially in tuned form of course, and this is an issue potentially with any front-wheel drive car, I always felt that the Civic suffered from a lot more torque steer when tuned than the Integra does. In this game though, it feels great through corners, it really does. It feels spot on handling wise, very low centre of gravity, it's very light to begin with, which makes it an excellent choice of track car in a similar way to stuff like the RS versions of the Mitsubishi Evo, where they've got not necessarily any more power, but they're just already lighter, and that's fantastic for track use. If you are an EK fan, and you know, a v-tec club fanboy and all that kind of stuff, you'll definitely love this car, because it looks better than it ever has before. The graphics, of course, the sound is authentic, the performance is fantastic for what it can do, and it feels like a very, very good choice of N200 car. Plus, incidentally, if you want to try it out in a lower class, you actually can. You can detune this thing to less than 100 horsepower, which is kind of nuts, and of course you never would, but the option is there if you need it. But for me, the thing that really caps off the whole very impressive package that this car offers is the price. Because although you can earn a ton of cash in Gran Turismo Sport very easily, of course, like you can in most racing games through one way or another, that's not really the point. A good value car is still good value regardless of how much cash you've got in the bank. This one to me is very clearly good value because it's 20 grand. That is dirt cheap. In fact, it's one of the cheapest cars in the game. And for 20 grand, you've got a car which, with stock power, can overtake Audi R8s and stuff like this in this event, and then you tune it up and it's got even more potential. It's essentially like the hatchback equivalent of something like a Porsche GT3 RS. It's just this purely focused, lightweight, technically road legal but very much so track biased, legendary car which, regardless of how you feel about the whole JDM club and the v-tec fanboy movement and all that kind of stuff, which can seem obnoxious, let's be honest, with all of that being considered, if you consider the car objectively speaking, regardless of your fandom, it's just impressive. To me, the Type R Hondas are always impressive. The Civic and the Integra of this particular era, the late 90s, have always impressed me the most, because if a car can do with 180 or 190 horsepower what a hot hatch from a decade later had to do with 220 or 250, well, of course, that's going to win my respect. So although for me the EK will never be, for instance, even in my top 10 favourite hot hatches, I don't think any Honda Civic variation would. In fact, I will definitely say I think it's an excellent choice of hot hatch, a superb choice in general of lower end class competitors, especially front wheel drive ones, and although it certainly will never come close to the love that I have for the DC2 Integra, I do certainly see why people like the car so much. It has a lot to offer, it's more than a match for stuff like your Golf GTIs and various other front-wheel drive hot hatches, easily with 100 or more horsepower advantages over it, or seeming advantages. So yeah, if you want to check out this car, you won't be disappointed, regardless of if you're a fan of it already. It's just one of those cars which is genuinely good. So that's it for my thoughts. I will be doing a tune setup one way or another. I haven't actually built it yet, so it might be an N200 circuit tune or something like that, but of course, stick around on the channel for that, and until then, I'll see you next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.